Welcome to Being Curious podcast show with Counselling Reflections, a podcast where we dive deep into the human experience, uncovering stories of resilience and triumph. We are proudly supported by Moskin, a UK-based skincare line infused with sea moss.
Good morning, wherever you are in the world. It's probably not even morning, it's probably the afternoon or the evening. So I invite you all to come along on a journey with me. Today I'll be speaking with Safiyah. I think, Safiyah, you can introduce yourself and just tell everyone where you are, what you do, or what you want to share with us.
Yeah, of course. So my name, you've had is Safi, which is actually a nickname that very few people are allowed to use. Actually, it's actually, to me, a lot of people from like my secondary school life, and before that, call me Safi, and anyone after that call me like Saf, because I consider it like really close people. But my full name is Safiyah Maria Padano.
Safiyah Marina Padano.
Safiyah Maria Padano.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And was quite interested. My first two names has actually become my brand. I can do a whole list of all the things I am. Like all my, which to me, I feel like isn't very fitting anymore. Very interesting, I know. So usually when people introduce themselves, will be, I'm a chef, I'm this and that, all of these lists of things, like, or occupations, or but I think I'm an explorer of life. I am very interested in herbalism and natural living and intuitive living and the culinary arts and my ancestral history.
Wow, there is a lot to begin with and unpack, and I'm very curious. I'm so curious, first of all, about your name and how that fits with your brand, and does your name have meaning?
Yeah, of course. So my name. So my first name is Safiyah. Spelled Safiyah. Interestingly, I found out that was meant to be my sister's name, actually. Yeah, I found out later. And it's an Arabic name. And the history behind that is my parents, when they was raising us, when they was having children, they were part of the Nation of Islam growing up. And that will heavily influence my upbringing. So all my siblings, me, all have Arabic names, and my brother and sister, their middle names are my parents' given Arabic names. So that's about my siblings. But yeah, that's the reason why I have an Arabic name.
I mean, it's really interesting because it's the beginning of Black History Month in America. The fact that you've got a Nation of Islam, and it's the leanings towards Islam and an Arabic name. How did that influence your journey and the way that you show up and the way that you see yourself?
I think I'll start with how I was brought up, because I think that's what was heavily influenced. So growing up, I would consider it conscious living, right? So with the Nation of Islam, if people don't know, it is essentially like a Black nationalist like religion, and it was founded by I believe his name was Elijah Muhammad, and his understudy was Malcolm X. And it was a religion that was founded for Black people. And it definitely originated in America. And and one part of that was reclaiming how we treat ourselves, how we are nourishing ourselves, right? So they were really big on like conscious living, so which is healthy eating, and like so growing up I didn't have any dairy. So I was brought up solely on like soya milk. Yeah, I like vividly remember it. Like we had to go to, there was only one place that sold alternative milk growing up, which was Holland and Barrett. And I remember we had to get our milk from Holland and Barrett, and there was only one carton, and there wasn't this whole craze around like alternative milk. So and on top of that, I didn't eat red meats, or processed foods, or so like for me, it's a running joke between me and my siblings because we didn't really have sweet things. So I have vivid memories of going to like my grandma's over the summer holidays because we used to stay at my grandma in Hertfordshire over the summer holidays, and she used to have like a conservatory that was just filled with sweets, all things from like Costco, all fizzy drinks.
So did she do that to kind of annoy your parents, or you know? And then what was it like to kind of have a space where at home you're conscious living, you're mindfully putting in things that are plant-based or just kind of non-processed in a way, and then you go to grandma's, it's got all the sweets. How was that?
Well, I don't think it was intentionally done. Like my grandma, I think we had like a lot of family that would always go to my grandma, so she would always have things there. So you always was able to take. You was always able to have your fill, for example. Whereas at home, as much as now I'm saying it was a conscious way of living or natural living, I wasn't understanding that as a kid. So as a kid, you're thinking it's like punishment. You're like, why is it that everyone else is able to live a life like this, but at home we're not able to? And when we were growing up, we did see it in a restrictive way, because as much as now for myself, I have gone and done the work to understand maybe where my parents have come from at that time to give more understanding to my childhood. At the time, that's not what you're thinking.
That's not what you're thinking. You're wanting to be. Is it that you're wanting to be like everyone else? You're wanting to kind of just eat what you want,
Absolutely.
and fit in. But then your parents must have been ahead of its time, because as you know, people of color, you know, I can imagine they were also kind of pioneers of food or what it meant to look after your body.
No, absolutely. I think that that's something that has stuck with me since young, because as much as I say that my parents were part of the Nation Islam, it wasn't something that was consciously practiced. So there was parts of it taken, like certain values and ways of living that was taken from their experience that they then channeled into their parenting. But on top of that, I also have like influence from my granddad in Jamaica, which I know influences my mother, but he is Rastafarian, and he is like that. Meeting him changed everything in my life.
Really? So what age is your granddad, and what was it about him being a Rasta man, I suppose an ITAL man in Jamaica? What was that about? What was his...
Oh, so I had always heard about him. So growing up, I had always heard about my granddad, but he never came to London, right? He was like, I'm not leaving Jamaica. Like,
free. He just felt very connected to the earth.
He said, this is home. So when I first met him was I can't remember the year, but I just know it was the year that my parents broke up. I was like about,
yeah.
I think I was coming out of primary school. I think I was like in my last year of primary school. So I would have been about like 10 years old. Right. I would have been about 10 years old. And meeting him, it showed me what was possible. I think that growing up, I had seen obviously like mostly my Mauritian side of my family, and I hadn't ever really connected to my Jamaican side of the family. And meeting him, I was like, oh, like it was like I was opened up to a whole different world. And growing up, I loved cooking, right? I was always in the kitchen. And I'd always heard that my granddad was a cook. But when I met him and saw that someone had this part of their living, but not as a restriction, not as something that was punishing them, but it was a way of living, as in you do it because it's better for you. And it really reshaped the way that I viewed natural living and cooking. Like when I was in Jamaica, I was attached to him. Like I was literally by his hip all the time. I was always watching him cooking. And even to this day, I still do it. But meeting him, it showed me someone else like that looked different as well. And I had always seen my Mauritian side, and that definitely like grappled with like identity for me.
And then Mauritian culture, is it an amalgamation of Indian, African, European? Is a blended Chinese? Yes, it's a blended culture, isn't it?
Very multicultural. And I feel like for me, life is forever a journey of understanding like what has come before me. And even with my Mauritian side, I now see it like so different, and I see how connected I am without even realizing it. Like being in, like, for example, I went to uni, right? And I studied a module which was like East Indian traditions. And I absolutely fell in love with so many different Eastern traditions, like, and religions. And that then took me to Fang Yoga. And yeah, we can have this conversation about, like, it's a whole separate conversation about yoga and where it originates from and things like that. But the bulk of it today resides in India, right? And I, like, even now I'm training to be a yoga teacher, and finding this connection to India, I was like, I'm just became obsessed with Indian culture. And then in the past year, I found out that my Mauritian heritage is Indian. But I always knew it, but it was much closer than I thought, to the point of finding out that my granddad is from Goa and my grandma is from Punjab. That close, to the point where it is literally my great-grandparents who I've met. And I didn't ever know that those connections are there. And I think the older I'm getting, I'm realizing a lot that sometimes looking at the feeling and what pops up is enough to verify it. You don't have to see the confirmation of seeing it on paper or knowing where it is in your family.
Yeah.
If you're being called to something, you're being called for a reason.
It's interesting you're saying that. I'm listening to you, and it feels like the echoes of our ancestors are with us today, because I'm just reminding myself of when I first went back to St. Vincent and I was about 19. Up until that point, I lived in a white middle class area. I grew up in care, so I didn't have a connection with my family in the way that often kind of told stories. I did have a connection with my grandmother, so I knew where the location, but it wasn't until you kind of, stand on the soil, eat the food, drink the water, that it kind of came alive for me. And in terms of like history, and I can imagine like food is a really important part of Jamaican culture, and Jamaican culture is a hybrid of Nigerian, Ghanaian, Indian, Japanese, European. So for you, I think you're like the daughter or the sister of the earth, that actually you're kind of spread all over the place, and maybe just your genes are just waking up for you.
I love that you say that, because that really does describe the experience. And I'm quite big on being being home, being where it starts, being where your ancestors were, because I feel like growing up in the UK, I think while we are connected to our families and we have our grandparents here who were probably the first to migrate here, and they maybe have stories and things like that, you will never have the same experience from hearing about it compared to being where they experienced it and seeing it in real time. It's a completely different experience. And I think for me growing up, I've had this realization that just because you do have that connection with your grandparents here, you are still a Western child. And a lot of
what makes you see that then for yourself?
I've grown up here. The people I've been around, the food I've eaten, the content I consume, my education, my everything I experience here, I still have the privilege of being a Western child growing up in the West compared to, say, my cousins back in Mauritius who were born there, grew up there, went to school there. Like, it's completely different. And I think a lot of people here, this is the journey I've been going on, I would say, in the past 2 years, where people here, as much as I understand that you are trying to understand your ancestral history and things like that, you at the same time need to acknowledge that you are a Western child. So you are going to have a Western perspective on a lot of things. And I think a lot of people don't really accept that, because it's not saying it's a good or bad thing. Because sometimes I think when you hear the term Western, I know for me, I think white. For me, I think white. I think privileged. I think everything's accessible to you. I think, but then in my head, I was like, wait. Let me think about myself and my white counterparts. The only difference between us is that you're white and you have your white privilege, but I still have the privilege of being a Western child.
So interesting. So you're saying, okay, for many people of color, actually being here can often feel like a negative experience, but maybe they're actually recognizing there's privilege regardless. There's privilege for someone who may be white. There's privilege for someone who might be Irish or Scottish or class. But you could say that in some ways you can be a child of West, and because everything that is around you and influence, subliminally or consciously or deliberate, has been nurtured here. Whereas for your cousins in Mauritius, they have different experience, and they're not necessarily wrong experiences, but just different experiences.
Yeah, and I think one point to make is that just by being a Western child and growing up here doesn't make it a negative experience. I think that negative part is self-inflicted. And there's this narrative where it's like, because I'm here and I know that I'm here in the West, there's this rejection of the West while still existing in the West.
I think that's interesting, because I know for some people, they might struggle to say that they're English or British or Welsh, or maybe not as much Welsh. I think there's something about saying that you're English or saying that you're born here. And it could be multiple generations that you're born here, because there's an assumption that people arrived just now, when there's been Black presence in the UK for hundreds of years. And so therefore there are multi-layers, whether you see it in skin tone or not. When you think one of the oldest probably Black heritage in the UK is in Scotland. The Moors were in Scotland. The Kinks, there are certain features. I always find it interesting when you kind of watch these kind of DNA programs, and one guy 7 times removed was an African, his grandfather was African. So it's not always in plain sight. And then what does it mean to have an identity that is rooted in being British or English?
I think the first thing is accepting that is your experience. I think that's the thing. I think a lot of people reject it because they're not accepting it. So as much as I understand some people, like, because I know the kind of people you're talking about when it's like, oh, I don't want to accept the fact that I'm British or that my nationality, for example, they'd rather go by their ethnicity. And I'm like, for me, I know I had a period of time where I was doing that. But what changed for me was when I was making the active decision to reconnect with my family in Jamaica. And then I haven't done it as much, but in Mauritius. So, like, for example, this may be when I go to Jamaica, no one's looking at me like I'm a local. No one's looking at me like I'm a born and bred Jamaican, because I'm not. And I think a lot of people aren't acknowledging that they're sometimes coming from Britain, never having their connection back home, and then going home and claiming to be from there. I'm like, but have you done the work to reconnect and acknowledge just who you are coming in? Because
So is it in terms of a starting point, just to kind of say that actually, you're right, when you go to the Caribbean, you know, you could just walk. I think even the clothes that you wear, even the way that you walk, people know you're foreign, you know, and you're trying to kind of immerse yourself into God, but there's nothing. I remember waiting for a bus and couldn't get back to where we were staying because they couldn't understand what the hell I was saying. And I was just talking like this, you know. And it was Khadijah who kind of then started speaking in patois, and then we was able to get on the bus. But I think we got to miss 5 buses before we could actually get on the bus when Khadijah rescued the day, and she was about 7, and she's born here, and she's second generation. I absolutely can kind of concur, but there's something about, you know, identity and what does it mean to belong, and are people not feeling connected because of family scripts or things that they are witnessing on television or old stories of inclusion or exclusion? Why is it, what makes you feel that you can claim or want to claim when there are other things that tell you actually you can't claim, you're not here?
Well, it's interesting that I think that people are actually coming from a place of fear. So let me laugh. So let's use like the Caribbean for example. I think that a lot of people who are born here in Britain, right, when they want to reconnect with their roots, they want someone to do it with them. They want someone to kind of carry them through it so that they won't be ridiculed for kind of wanting to connect, rather than having the humility to accept that you aren't from there, but still want to learn and connect. Because I don't think there's anything wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with it to me. And I think that that's something that I kind of had to grapple with. So when I was in Jamaica, I kept feeling like, yeah, but I want to be like you, or I want to be able to just talk, like be the same as the locals, right? But when you have to be honest and be like, I'm not like you. So I need to do the work to first be like, can I like, am I being welcomed for one? And accepting that I am not the same.
It's multifaceted because I think it also can be looked at the other way, or the other side, when you are an immigrant coming here to the UK and you want to settle. Some people stay really close to their communities, their identity in the home culture, maybe back home, is really powerful. And so therefore the food that they eat, the language that they speak at home are really important way of grounding them here. And so therefore, may never feel at ease here because society might look at you, or you got an accident and so you're foreign, but you might have been here 30, 40 years. Some people feel that because you're born here, that's not enough. But actually, you got to go back generations before you can claim your identity. But the beauty and the joy of the UK is the fact that we're all immigrants, apart from the Celts, that were pushed towards the north and pushed to, to Scotland and pushed towards Ireland.
Well, I think the difference between the two is that there's being accepted by others, and then there's accepting yourself. So I think those are the two sides to it. So for me, I'm like, if you are here, if you are accepting of yourself, you don't need the validation of being accepted by other people. And you'll be able to go into certain spaces and be very solid in who you are. And I think that where this identity complex comes from is wanting that acceptance from everyone.
Do you think it's wanting acceptance from everyone? So the external validation. Do you feel like that actually those people who are struggling to kind of feel at peace within themselves want external validation from other people or everyone? Because in some ways we have to also accept that actually there's going to be a percentage of people that love us, percentage of people that don't love us, and a percentage of people that are indifferent to us. And that is okay. Maybe that's kind of, a healthy way of doing it. So you're saying that actually, when you're wanting to be accepted by everyone, you're not accepted at all in some ways?
Not necessarily, not that you're not accepted at all. It's more the starting point. So on what you're looking for. So I think that a lot of people aren't accepting themselves because other people aren't accepting themselves, as opposed to you are accepting yourself because you are very solid in who you are. So for example, I'll use the example of like Jamaica. I think that for a long time I was a bit scared to claim my Jamaican heritage because I felt like I didn't have the connection, because I wasn't accepted by a lot of people in the Jamaican community, because I haven't been back home. I haven't had the connection that would verify my Jamaican heritage. But for me, in my own journey, I know that I have family, I have very solid relationships, I do the work and I learn, and it's okay that I don't know the same as what a local would, because that isn't my experience. I was just being honest about what it is and not what I think it needs to be.
So that's interesting, isn't it? What the experience is and not what it needs to be.
But then,
and it's interesting you kind of saying that, because I suppose there's this, we can't generalize all experiences, and that people are going to feel really aligned with your thinking or very different to your thinking. I think it's an individual pursuit, and I think it evolves over time. I think when I went to the Caribbean for the first time, I was probably 19. Subsequently, I went to other islands and did other things. And I think increasingly over the years, the debate of who I am came from a DNA, which keeps to fluctuate. So now I have a broader sense of the kind of percentage or of who I might be in relation to my own DNA. So, and that is beyond the Caribbean islands. It is part of obviously the slave trade, is part of the diaspora. But now I have a sense, whereas before I thought I was, my heritage was English. It's not, it's Irish, Portuguese in terms of European parts, Spanish, never knew, those kind of information. But Nigerian really strongly. And I knew that from my own research. Well, my island. I say my island because my mum and dad and all that I know comes from that space. But although being born here, there's a kind of still a connection, or actually, am I legitimately British? What does that mean? Can I only be British when I'm watching football or the Olympics? Or is it that when I want certain things that I only know that comes from this culture, or when I watch certain programs that I sit down with friends who come from other cultures that we can share, but it's only because we are here. So I wonder if each generation has a different relationship to what it means to be.
Definitely, because it makes me think about my relationship with my mom. Because, like, for example, my mom's actually Jamaican Bayesian. And there was a key moment in time where I decided that I'm not Bayesian. You are. You have a direct relationship to Barbados. You spent a lot of your summers there. Your mom is from there. Like, you have a direct connection to it. But for me, I have none. And I think for a long time, I kept saying Bayesian. I was like, I have no connection to this island. Like, I have literally no connection to this island. And just because that my mom is there doesn't mean that I need to identify with it. And I think that being someone who is essentially mixed, like, because coming from different islands, I was like, not mixed in the sense of white, black, but mixed just by the fact that I'm from different islands and on different cultures. I decided at one point when I think it was after I went to Mauritius and also was going, like, I made a conscious effort to go to Jamaica for extended periods of time and spend time with my granddad and just be in Jamaica and just learn. I said to myself, from this point onward, I am Jamaican Mauritian. And he made that decided effort and it made her really upset. And I was like, I understand that, but I don't identify with it.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because one that comes to mind is Small Islands. So there was a film and play about small islands and the dominance of Jamaica and Trinidad against the small islands. So I am not surprised, given that an identity in London in the 2000s or late 90s, would have been a Jamaican identity. Having been as a small island who has to land in Barbados the time, you're missing a trick, But what's really interesting for me, you're an islands girl. All part of your heritage in some way is surrounded by water. So, and what yes, Jamaica is surrounded by water, Barbados is surrounded by water, Mauritius is surrounded by water. So therefore, I don't know if it's about, what flag is standing on the soil, is what waters are anointing you.
Exactly. And for me, I find large bodies of water. This is something I would say in the past, 3 years that I've really solidified myself. Water is spiritual. Fire is how you connect with spirit, to me. And I had this experience in 2023. In 2020, I have, 2 experiences. And 2023 is what verified it. When I first went to Mauritius, I did this thing where I asked my uncle, can you just watch over me while I float? Just so you know, I don't drift out to sea. So I like to really meditate in the water. And for me, being in the water is like, call it a baptism, if you will. But it lets the earth hold you. And it almost is a factory reset on your spirit. And when your ears, and I could only talk from my own experience, but when my ears are submerged in the ocean, and I'm not talking about just water, the ocean, the sea, where it is part of the earth. It's not a man-made body. It is part of the earth. And especially when it is connecting to the largest sea. So that in Mauritius, that's connecting to obviously the Indian Ocean. Back in Jamaica, that's the Pacific Ocean, right? So when I was there, that was a factory reset, because it's because I'm not trying to sound like God, let me not even think of that. When you submerge your ears in the water, it's like you communicate in a way that is spirit language and it isn't words. And you can't put it into words. But you know what was being communicated.
So it's interesting because I had a conversation with a doctor who is Eastern medicine specialist, and she talks the same way. She was connected to dolphins and whales, and she lives in not in Florida, and she used to go to Tampa, and for some reason she's just connected to the water. I wonder if there's something about the fluidity and the movement. If I go to Cornwall, and if I think I believe in reincarnations or spirit or souls, Cornwall connects to me for some reason. I have deja vu when I go there. It feels like I've been there many times. But part of the Cornwall coastline is probably the coastline of St. Vincent and the Caribbean, that it's kind of mountainous, hilly, wide beaches and connected to the ocean. So I really get that you can kind of connect. Maybe this is something that talks to you because it is within your DNA that the environment itself switches on and off. And it just feels,
yeah, it awakens something. And I think that even if you look at, I think because we obviously live on land, right? I think that it's very easy to dismiss how important water is to our existence. So even if you look at just the human body, 70% water, right? If you look at the earth, it's majority water. If you look at the way it connects with planets, the water changes depending on the lunar cycle. So I'm really big on the lunar cycle too. So for me, when it comes to water, it holds so much more importance that you can't resist it. And the day that you welcome it and surrender to it is when, for me, everything changed. So I have this thing now where when I said that 2023 and that the experience in Jamaica verified it, I was really going through something. And I went to Jamaica and I said, so for me, going to Jamaica just is like a factory reset. Anyway, I went to Jamaica and I was like, I was lost. I didn't know what to do. I was like, it was a different kind of heartbreak that was like, it was in me. It was no one else, right? So when I went to this was Bomani Beach. That's where I usually go. And for me, that's like proper sea. I have this ritual where when I'm leaving, I say to the ocean, I'm like, wash away everything, take it on. Like, she'll take it and let me know what I need to take back with me. Implant in me what I need to take back with me. And I floated in that ocean for ages. Yeah. And what was in my ears than this, I was meditating in the ocean and I came back a completely different person. And that's why I say that water is spiritual, because when you do surrender to it, it is a spirit and it will hold you. I don't have the, what do you call it? Like the facts or solidifications and things like that.
I think it's about experiences though, isn't it? See, like, I'm wondering, on one hand, thinking water is really good as long as you can swim. But then when I think about babies, when they put them into the water, they swim, instantly.
The connection
there's almost a connection. I think in some ways there's something about when you surrender to yourself and then be in the present moment, because you can't really think about your thoughts, all the worries, all the stresses of life and float at the same time. Being present and being connected with water, the body that's supporting you, and you then kind of having to kind of sustain that. I wonder if that's a really deeply satisfying thing to do.
I mean, even if you look at just the physics of water, you can't actually resist water. You have to surrender to water. If you're in a large body of water, you can't just hold that water and say, no, you have to be like this. Water commands how you engage with it.
How does it, I see, yeah. So I'm just curious. How does it apply to the way that you cook? Or the way that you know, how you want to kind of practice your yoga? Because I think, how would you kind of use water in that way?
I fast, I cleanse, I eat a lot of water-based fruit and veg. It heavily influences how I eat. So just for context, like, so I used to be vegan, plant-based, all that, but I'm very much like, I go with how I feel. I go with how I feel now, and I'm not restricted, but I will always have moments of times where I think over the years, I've connected with my body, so I know what it needs, right? So there's some times where I'm like, I really am craving like protein, right? That's when I'll have my meats and things. But I don't really eat starches. I don't really eat rice, pastas. Like, my body doesn't like it. My body doesn't like it, and I think that changed ever since like around like 2017. I became very obsessed with like cleansing and detoxing and things like that, where I would go on 30-day fasts and I was only drinking fluids. I was only drinking like lemon water. Yeah. And once you have that kind of experience and how the body responds, you'll understand the importance of fluid. You can live without food and just water, right? But you can't live without water. You cannot live without water. And water is almost like petrol for the body. It keeps the body ticking. It keeps the engine flowing. And when you have, say, water-based fruits, like for me, I have like broths, things like that, my body like have it. Like,
happy.
Yeah.
What made you start to fast? Because I must admit, I am an advocate for intermittent fasting. I know it's not for everyone, but I know that when I do fast or have restricted eating windows, I feel a lot better for it. I am an advocate of kind of wanting to kind of drink lots of water, as opposed to, but I do go through kind of all extremes. What made you want to fast? What was it about 2017 that kind of, because you would have been pretty young to kind of land on this as a concept?
Yeah. Quite honestly, it was grief. It was grief. I lost my dad in 2016, unexpectedly, out of nowhere. He was in a car crash in May, and he was gone by September. And I didn't even get to say bye to him. And I think for me, I had a very unique experience because growing up, I really did struggle with my mental and things like that. My dad was my anchor. And it was the first time in my life I was like, oh, sugar, like, well, I gotta do this on my own now? Like, he would guide me through it. He was like literally my best friend. Like, if I was at work, he would be there, drop me to work, be on my lunch break, meet me after work. And this is like when I'm like 19, right? And when that happened, year after, it was like I was completely stripped. And I was like, it led to my first, for me, it was my first spiritual awakening. And I've always been someone that is very connected, but that completely changed everything. And that was when I started my brand. I started my online blog, Food, because the last thing he said to me, because I used to always send him my food pics, The last thing he said to me was like, you need to get this out there. Like, you need to share this with the world. You need to, like, post this online and stuff. Like, stop sending it to me. Like, post it online. And when he then passed, I was like, I guess I'll do what he said. And for me, that's why when people look back on my journey, I'm like, it wasn't me being like, oh my God, this is what I want to do. It was grief. And I was very much in my own bubble. And it was tunnel vision. It was the only thing that kept me sane. And when it came to now 2017, I started to delve into the things that my dad would talk to me about. So
your dad was very much kind of fasting and looking after your body, or
not necessarily the fasting side. He was very spiritual. He was very big on history. And what I did was, the year that he passed, he had gone to Egypt. And naturally there's a lot of people in the Black community that have that connection to Egyptian history and maybe consider it part of our ancestry. But to me, I was just like, there's clearly something in Egypt that holds larger meaning. Whether it's connected to me and my heritage, different conversation. But there's something I can learn from this civilization, right? So the year that he was in a car accident is when me and my sister actually just went to Egypt. And that was life-changing for me. And I just became really obsessed with Egyptian history. And I was researching also how that was connected to the Black community, especially in like America, especially part of like Asian Islamic people who follow certain lifestyles. And I was just under this rigorous study, and I was just getting loads of books and just learning. And honestly, I became really consumed by just learning. And even to this day, I still have the books of like Kemetic way of living, or even like, do you know like Queen Safiyah? Like she's really big on, she has a book called like Sacred Woman.
Yes, I've got the book actually. Yes, I do.
I love that book. But yeah, I haven't read it all the way through, but we'll follow the steps. But she talks about some really interesting things in there. And for me, what introduced me into fasting was that rigorous study. So I just thought, okay, I'm already really on this like plant-based track. So I was like, let me take it a step further. I then understood like the importance of detoxing your body. And as much as people will say like, oh, your body detoxes itself, why can I not help it along that way? So I just, I was detoxing my body through how I was eating. And then I was also having large stints of just fasting. And when I saw what it did to my body, I was like, it is spiritual. Because when you purge your body, you're making room for the abundance that you're trying to come into your life.
It's interesting. I'm mindful that not for everyone it probably isn't the way forward, but for when you think about lots of countries and communities around the world fast at any given time, whether it's for religious reasons, whether it's for, Lent, giving up something. There is something about not having abundance, but having some restriction. And the science is out there now to say that actually fasting can have really good results in reversing some of the kind of damage that we do within society by actually having restrictive, living. I'm also kind of interested in the fact that actually, like the spirituality side of things has its origins within your genes, within your like dad's. Maybe within mum as well, that kind of sense of self, kind of sense beyond that. Yeah.
They used to fast. Like I found out later, this wasn't even at the time. I found out later that my mum and dad, when they were part of the Nation Islam and it was part of their way of living, they would fast once or twice a week. So they used to say there was particular days of the week that they would fast, and it was part of their spiritual practice. And when you think about fasting, or in a spiritual or religious sense, it's a form of sacrifice. It's a form of self-sacrifice. Abstaining from something is you sacrificing for God giving you that abundance or the blessings later. And for me, again, I do see it as part of a Western outlook. We don't want to sacrifice. We want everything, but we don't want that initial sacrifice. And a lot of people...
It's interesting because I suppose if we're looking at the individualistic approach,
Absolutely.
Western ideology, and there's, in some ways, I think there's still parts of, I'm beginning to, through conversations with lots of different people, recognize that lots of people from different communities, even if they are Western, are thinking and feeling the same as you, wanting to be connected in some way, wanting to strip back and be part of their own ancestry. Because if they go back further enough, these ideas were there to begin with anyway.
But I think when we talk about like Western ideology, or when I'm referring to people that were brought up in the West, it definitely is more about a perspective that I'm referring. So yes, we can have the conversation about the larger community, but if we are talking about that individualistic perspective that we have on ourselves and how we engage with our spirituality, just by how we have been brought up here, we have not understood the concept of sacrifice because everything is accessible to us. That's how I see it. And I'm only talking from my
experience. Well, that's something, I think that's something to kind of think about, because I suppose here in the north of the country, I can see lots of sacrifice that parts of the UK have had to kind of deal with at the expense of London having the resources, or the southeast having the resources. You know, transportation links, maybe not having the tube up here, maybe not having finances in the same way to develop things in the same way, hasn't been in the north. So from a northern perspective, absolutely have they sacrificed the greater parts of kind of development compared to the rest of the country. And then if you then think of probably Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland, again, not all resources are equally distributed, and when you go parts of...
I think even recently I've had to experience that because I moved outside of London, and I think I realized that the first time I did. So I'm living in Watford now, and it's not crazy outside. It's just like on the suburb, like just outside. And I haven't got a bus coming every 2 minutes. I've had to reprogram myself to see the joy in certain things I have to do and not see it as a inconvenience. So for example, I now walk everywhere. And that was based upon the fact I was like, why am I not seeing it as a privilege to be able to even do that? I'm able to walk. So why am I not using my body as a form of transport?
So it's interesting, isn't it? Just moving slightly out of London, the way that you're kind of looking at things is different. I think it's really interesting to kind of look at actually what does it mean to have privilege, and how can we have our own internal privilege, the ability to walk if we can, see, to hear, to move in the way that we want, to be youthful, you know, to be old, to actually reach your age and still be around to think your thoughts. Maybe there's a privilege that we don't often express.
I think you have to, not you have to, but I can only talk from my experience, but I think seeing that being taken away from someone, you see how much you do take it for granted. And I know for myself, that was like a vow I made to myself, where I was like seeing, like, just for context, like when my dad did have the car accident, he was completely paralyzed from chin down. And to see that be just stripped from someone overnight, I said, I'm never going to take my body for granted. The fact, every time I work out, every time I walk, I'm like, if I'm able to, I will do it. Because I don't want to ever take that for granted, because tomorrow the same could happen to me. So whenever there is and I know that comes from my own personal experience. For someone else, it may be something else. Like, it doesn't have to be like a tragedy or like seeing it being taken away from someone. Sometimes someone breaks their leg and they're like, damn, like, now I can't do that. But for me, when I maybe hear someone in London be like, oh, it's a 10-minute walk, I'm like, I'm doing that 45-minute walk to the station. I'm about to see something.
You know what? It's interesting, isn't it? I remember having to walk to school, and that was like 2 miles, every day, snow, rain, under lightning, kind of thing. And then come to London, and I will move out of London and think, oh my gosh, I've got to wait 10 minutes for a bus. Who does that? It's interesting within that. Safi, I would like to say thank you. I could talk to you all day long, actually. I think a wonderful ability to tell a story from your own lived experience. I think there is so much that you give your food and your visions and the way that you see the world to be. And I think also grateful for your family, your mum and dad for giving birth to you and your siblings, because actually you're here for a reason. So I wonder what that journey will look like in future years to come. How can people find you? Where's, in terms of social media or work or stuff that you're promoting, where can we find you?
Well, firstly, thank you, because just that little conclusion really touched my heart. And it's been a joy to talk to you. It's always a joy to talk to you. In terms of how to find me, you can find me on Instagram. Which is at Safiyah Maria, SAFIYAH MARIYAH. I also have my other Instagram, which is more for where I call it a place to find my culinary creations, which is my event series, which is SAFs by SM. Yeah, that's mostly where you find me. I'm also on TikTok. Other than that, if you wanted to just drop me an email and just chat, it's the same as my handle at Gmail at SafiyahMaria.com. Hello at SafiyahMaria.com. So yeah.
Thank you very much for agreeing to be on our show, for being curious with me, and for being curious with Counselling Reflections. So thank you.